First, thanks to DARPA for inviting me, and thanks to DARPA for coming to Detroit, right? It's fabulous. And thank you all for coming here and your time here today. Doesn't look like the slideshow is working. There we go. Okay. So when Bill called and told me that the forum was going to be here in Detroit and that he would like to get a representative from the auto industry to talk, and about the mission of ERI, I got pretty excited. I was like, you know, when we look at the activities that are going in the auto industry, and in general in the consumer electronics industry, and our need for technology is at a different pace than it's ever been before. And the opportunities to try to leverage each other and figure out how we work better together sound like a perfect venue to come and talk to. And then when he mentioned that I could pick a Motown song, what better than It Takes Two, right? It takes both of us to figure this out. And in particular, if you look at sort of the way we've operated in the past, by we, I mean the consumer market in industry, we're like the hungry little baby robins in the nest, you know, chirping for the technology to fall out of the sky, and then for us to figure out how to go forward with it. And that model worked okay when the pace of technology was slow. We could take the time to do whatever government had done and academia had done and figure out how to commercialize it in our way and in our time, right? But the development time is no longer acceptable, right? A good example of that would be radar, right? Look at the investment that was made by the government in developing not only the technology, but also the ability to up-integrate and then enable us, the consumer and industry, to then apply our volumes to the problem to drive the cost down. But it was sort of a wait until you're done before we engaged. And then look at another example where it's kind of flipped around, in particular with LiDARs. Right? In industry and the consumer world, we're all chasing sort of a chip scale LiDAR, right? Trying to get all of the photonics, both the generation, the beam steering, and then the detection, all of that in a highly integrated chip so that we can then deploy it with our volumes, right? And you look at the amount of money that's being invested by not only industries, but the venture capital area, billions of dollars are being thrown at this problem, right? And there are hundreds of startups working on this. So we don't have sort of that central authority or central coordinator, you know, to help us navigate through some of that, right? So there's got to be a better way, right? It's no good for the government to wait until we apply our volumes to a new technology to deliver to the government, and it's no good for the government to drop technology on us anymore, right? So we got to find something, a new way of working. And there are a lot of opportunities. In particular, the one that really comes to mind is with artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? And I don't want to take Praveen Philly of HRL's thunder, because I know he's going to talk about it later. But there's a lot of opportunities there where you see industry investing a lot of money, and you see the government investing a lot of money. And we have common problem sets, right? So we have to figure this out, right? We've got to find the 2020 version of Rosie the Riveter, right? To come in, and let's figure out how to get this going. Right? So here's a picture of the Warren Tech Center, where where my office is. It's just a little north and west of here, and about a mile from Tardak. Right? So if you talk about opportunities to collaborate, right, we're just a mile apart. So there's got to be some opportunities there for us to work together. The other thing, coming to Detroit was a really, really good idea. As you heard earlier, the investment in Detroit is at an unbelievable pace right now. The Hudson Mall is being renovated. Ford has bought the old train station and is moving their autonomy and electrification headquarters there. So there's a lot of activity in Detroit. And if you look at the auto industry in particular, every major company is either headquartered here in Detroit or has their North American headquarters here in Detroit, or has their research and engineering development center for North America here in the greater Detroit area. So it's really a hotbed. It's still the heart and soul of the auto industry. And not only are the automotive OEs present here, but all of our suppliers. Right? Again, they're either headquartered here, have their North American headquarters here, and or engineering and research and development centers here, right? So if you want anything done in the auto industry, this is the place to get it done. And then these are some stats about the numbers in the area. The one that really pops out to me is the R&D spending, right? 76% of the R&D spending for the auto industry is focused around this area, right? And it's, what do they say, $10 billion approximately annually, right? So now every university professor is all excited about the Detroit area, right? And all the money that's here, right? So there's lots of opportunities for us to collaborate. I'm going to talk a little bit about General Motors' vision and what we're committed to. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when it first came out, Mary Barra, our CEO, first announced this a few years ago. It was really cutting edge at the time. But what you see now is almost every auto manufacturer has embraced these principles to some degree or another. I think Mary had done an unbelievable job of condensing a very difficult thing to communicate into something very simple. 3 zeros, right? 0 crashes, 0 emissions, 0 congestion, right? So at GM, we often talk about that we're working on the 3 zeros, right? 0, 0, 0. Matter of fact, it's probably the only place you can work where your boss can ask you what you're doing. You can say, I'm doing 0, and get still a good raise. The other interesting thing about, again, this is right from Mary Barra, our CEO's slide deck, is underneath the 0, 0, 0 is the emphasis on technology, right? Technology will help unlock the future, right? So this isn't any, kind of just nice saying. It's an acknowledgement that we're going to have to work really, really hard at bringing new technologies to bear in order to answer the 0, 0, 0 challenge, right? So GM is fully committed, and really the entire auto industry is too, about delivering these technologies and these capabilities to the market. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of sensing in the vehicle. If I would have been up here a decade ago and told you you could not buy a car without a radar on it, you probably would have thought I'd be crazy, right? So now when I tell you in another decade from now, you're not going to be able to buy a car without 10 radars on it and multiple LiDARs on it, right? Maybe you won't think I'm quite as crazy, but it's going to happen. And really on the radar front, what's enabled that is really the large-scale integration that we've been able to do, and then bring our volumes to bear on that problem and drive the costs down to the point where putting 10 radars on a car isn't a fantasy anymore, right? And that's the same thing that we're looking at with LiDARs. In particular, why the big race to try to get to this chip scale LiDAR so that we can bring the same efficiencies of integration to the process and take something that costs $10,000 and drive it down to a couple $100. Right? The levels of autonomy that are shown there, level 2, 3, and 4, 4/5, are the Society of Automotive Engineers have come out with a sort of a definition of what these autonomous levels are. And by far the majority of auto manufacturers and suppliers use those definitions. But there's still a lot of confusion in the marketplace because we do have some suppliers and some automotive manufacturers that don't follow that terminology. But I suggest you go out and look at the Society of Automotive Engineers, and when you start talking about autonomy and automated features, that we all start speaking the same language, right? And it's very helpful. So also wanted to talk about the evolution of the vehicle features itself. And I don't really want to talk about this slide, but I want you to think about what a car buying experience is today and what it's going to be like in the future. You know, when you go out and you buy a car today, or if you would have bought a car 3 years ago, and your lease is up and you're ready to turn it in, the car that you drove off the lot at the day of sale, point of sale, is probably the same car, more or less, that you're going to turn in. Maybe you got a couple dents on it or some things like that. But the function, the features, the applications that were on it at the time of purchase are basically what you have when you turn it back in, right? Well, that model is changing. That model is changing, and in a big way. And it's a big issue for us, for the auto industry in general. When you think about a car that you buy on day one, and then at some day, 1 + X, you get new features, new capabilities, right? There's artificial intelligence and there's machine language in that vehicle. So that vehicle is changing from point of sale through the life of the vehicle to when you turn it back in again, right? That creates, oops, must have hit the, that creates a number of different problems, right? We're very used to sort of linear time invariant systems where we have all kinds of math tools that we can apply, and we can predict the performance of something over the life of the vehicle, right? And on the hardware, we can do accelerated life testing, we can shake it, we can bake it, we can freeze it, we can spray salt on it. We can do all of these things to understand sort of a linear time invariant system performance. But now when we get into this new world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, where the vehicle is going to change, adapt over time, how do we do that? How do we ensure that over the life of your ownership experience, that the vehicle behaves in a reliable, consistent, and safe fashion? Right? It's a huge problem for us. And I know that Praveen will be talking about a little bit more about that later. And then finally, I just want to go back to the theme that it really does take two, right? That the challenges that we face are so similar between government issues and the private sector consumer issues that there's got to be better ways, better models for us to be able to collaborate. So I'm looking for the next Rosie Riveter in the crowd here, and let's figure this out. All right, thank you.